Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Perfect RIA podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Jarvis, and bringing back to the stage again my client success consultant, Karen Stewart from Belay. Karen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Matthew. Good to be here.
Yeah, now, Karen, I have to confess, there are not many repeat guests on this show. Now, that could be because of me. They're like, no, one, and I'm out. But really excited. I think we had a lot of fun last time we recorded. And one of the action items you gave listeners was to make a list of all of the tasks that they're doing. And today we want to jump into what some of those tasks might be and how to successfully delegate. So, Karen, I'd love for you to throw out a couple of things that you commonly see on that list, and we'll start working our way down it.
I love it. Okay. So email and calendar, always going to be probably at the top. Travel. Another thing that I see, Matthew, a lot with how everything's being automated are clients that come to me. I mean, I've had clients come with sticky notes all over their desk. They'll show me like their office sticky notes or notebooks or writing everything down. They need somebody to come in and introduce them to a task management tool that it can all be automated and that VA can actually manage the tasks. And when the client has something they need the VA to do, they just drop it on that tool and then the VA gets it done. That's really been a big one. And coming in and streamlining processes and procedures. Another thing that people ask for are standard operating procedures. So people are doing the same thing over and over again, but it's not documented anywhere. So our VAs can come in and they can create SOPs for onboarding, offboarding, even naming documents in a Google share file where no one can find anything because everyone's just dumping them in there. So just organizing and doing those kind of tests, our VAs are really good at too.
So I'm just going to confess, as you're listening through those, I'm thinking, all right, note to self, send this episode to Zach and tell him there's 7 things that I want him to do. But let's talk about these SOPs. I talk to advisors, a lot of times small business owners, and they say, hey, I need this process. And then they never, weeks go by, months go by, years go by. And I don't know if that's just a mental block in just how our brain works, but a lot of us think I need these processes and then nothing ever happens. So you're suggesting give that to the VA, hey, we need a process for when a client calls to schedule a meeting, document that out.
I love it. Yes. Everything should be documented. And especially if the client hopes to hand it over to someone else, that's a whole learning process then. But if you've got everything documented, someone can come in and pick it right up. So I think and you're right, Matthew, so many clients come to me and nothing is documented, but that's not what they're good at. And that's not what they're going to sit down and take the time to do when they've got so many other things on their plates. Look, we talked about when I was on last time with drafting the emails, it may not be right, but at least you're starting the process and you're starting to document things. And then the client can look at it and say, okay, this is right, but we need to make these changes. Yeah, they just need somebody to go in there and get it done.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's been more and more studies coming out that saying the incidence of ADD and ADHD is 4x or 10x higher amongst entrepreneurs than the normal population. And so our brains, and which I think is a superpower, but that's a different discussion. Our brains, a lot of times as an entrepreneur, are not wired for those types of tasks, right? The long emails or the SOPs or researching things. And sometimes we get stuck in this should land. I should write this. I should take care of these emails. I should do this and that. That's one approach. It's not empowering. Like Brene Brown talks about that. That's all shame-based. The could turns into, great, I will just give that to my VA. Every time I have a random thought, every time something crosses my mind, and this is, by the way, what I do. Hey, I should take care of this thing. You know what? What I'm going to do is just message it to Zach and say, hey, please put this on our list.
That's exactly right. And I think it's so funny that you said the ADHD thing.
Yeah. I
can't believe how many clients I talk to and they're like, okay, so just so you know, I have ADHD. Because they're such big thinkers. Yeah. I mean, it's all these great ideas and they're entrepreneurs and they're inventors and so their mind's going a million miles an hour. So they're not going to sit down and write 50 steps on how to onboard somebody.
Yeah, on that, we'll call those learning differences. And you and I both have teenage kids, and we could talk another day about schools and how they deal with learning differences. But some people struggle with writing, right? That's just not their medium of communication. And again, that's something you can beat yourself up. My dad is very dyslexic, and he had terrible time writing things. And it was always like a spot of shame for him until I said, no, Dad, just stop writing things, just dictate it. So then he would dictate into a voice recorder, or you can do it on your phone now, and then give that to an assistant and say, hey, please type this up into a letter form. And so maybe we're going down this different path here, but a VA can really help in areas where you're weak, where you're beating yourself up and saying, hey, I need to be better at this. I'm just not good at those things. I'm really good at these things over here. I'm not good at those. The things I'm not good at, I'm going to find somebody who's good at.
Absolutely. And we're not all good at everything. And I love that, what you talked about, talking to the phone, whether it's a Voxer or, I
Yeah.
mean, and a lot of clients do that, whether it's for a task or whether it's telling them I need this email done, or whether it's dictating something that an email that they need to go out. It is hard for a lot of like-minded people like you to just
Yes.
focus and say, I've got to get this done. Let somebody else handle it. Who's really good at it, who really likes doing it.
Yeah, and to your point on our last episode, right? Somebody who has a passion for serving, somebody who doesn't make excuses, and somebody who's got my back, so who understands, hey, you're probably just going to get like a mumbled sentence of instruction, and you're going to have to kind of peel that onion back and figure out and like decipher that. And that's okay. Like, that's just how we work together.
Yeah, and those are the kind of VAs that I always hope that I'm able to kick off with a client. Somebody that thinks outside the box and somebody that doesn't need every step explained to them, but can think critically and think, what does this client need? And as they get to know you better, that's a lot easier for them.
Another thing, Karen, that you had on the list as you were rattling these off was calendar management. And I want to highlight this one a little bit for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of us spend way too much time on this back and forth and email. Hey, does Tuesday at 2 work? No, Tuesday. What about Thursday at 4? And this ends up burning a lot of time, which a VA can handle. The other place, and I'm really curious your thoughts here, Karen, is if I'm doing the calendar, I break all my own rules. So if you and I are on the phone, like if right now you're like, hey, Matt, what are you doing next Thursday? Like, could we do another podcast episode? I'm going to be like, yep, we can totally do that. And I'll squeeze it in between 17 things and that will blow up my calendar. Whereas if you ask Zach will say, no, Matt does his podcast on Monday and here's his calendar link. But tell us a little bit more about what you've seen with calendars and VAs.
Oh gosh, what you said is just such a great point. So clients are just going to book back-to-back meetings.
Always, yeah.
Especially if it's if it's a client, it's important. When you've got a VA in there that is looking at your calendar and they know your preferences, they know when you want to meet, they know when they're not going to meet. Clients don't want to meet on Friday, so that whole day is booked off. And so it's just somebody, a gatekeeper, to make sure that you are being served the way you need to be served and that they're watching out for your well-being almost, because it's not healthy to have back-to-back meetings like that. So you are going to go ahead and keep booking that. But if you've got somebody who's totally managing that calendar, they're going to make sure that they're safeguarding those times when you don't want meetings.
Ties back to one of the things we talked about on our last episode together, which was kind of on that onboarding process, right? Being really clear with your expectations with your VA, but also, and this takes some vulnerability and it's hard to do, but be really clear with where your weaknesses are. And so that's one of the things I shared with Zach, like, hey, listen, I'm prone to overbooking and I really need you to hold me. In fact, you and I have had that discussions with Zach when we're doing our goal setting. Hey, I'm prone to overbooking. I'm prone to overcommitting. Please help me stay accountable for this. One of mine is I'm prone to not give enough buffer on travel time. So I'll look and I'll say, hey, my flight's going to land at 7:32. Book me somebody at 7:35. And Zach can be like, nope, we have this rule. There's a 2-hour buffer after you land before we book anything because we need some leeway. And I think a lot of that's just about owning, like, here's what I'm good at, here's what I'm not.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, that's just, like you said, vulnerability, to let them know this is what I'm not good at. And I think it's also trusting that person. So if you go ahead and you book something on the calendar and you know you shouldn't, then you're kind of going behind the VA who's supposed to be managing your calendar. I do have one VA that will literally cancel. She's like, you're not doing it. You don't want that time booked on your calendar. So I canceled that meeting.
Yeah.
And the client actually appreciates that.
Like, I like to have terminology. So with Zach and with everybody in my life, I always say, hey, if you feel like I'm crossing a line somewhere, then the terminology we use is, can I push back on that? So if Zach sees me over, he's like, hey, Matt, can I push back on that? Last time this happened, this went down. You sure you want to do that? So because I want him to feel empowered, I don't want him to feel like, hey, if I say something here, I'm crossing the line, but I don't want him to ignore things either. And so on that onboarding, to really say, hey, if you think I'm messing something up, here's a productive way. Because if Zach came to me and said, hey, Matt, you're screwing this up, I'm going to get defensive. I'm going to say, wait, you don't understand what's going on. But if he says, hey, can I push back on this? One time you told me it was really important at X, and I just want to make sure we're true to that.
I love that. And that's what we talked about in the other episode, was setting that up on onboarding expectations and how you're going to provide feedback and how direct you're going to be and how you both take feedback. Mm-hmm. Like some people are just so direct and that can bother some people, but some people that's what they want, is a really directness. So yeah, I love that. And it's just being open in the beginning to learning what the other person is like and their preferences.
Karen, something you mentioned on the list before we hit record was having your VA help with social media. So tell us a little bit about, like, how would that look? I mean, obviously they're not taking the social media pictures of your breakfast and posting those, whatever people do on these things. But where are you seeing VAs help with social media things?
Yeah, so we have, and I don't know if you know this, Matthew, but we have actual social media managers. That's taking over the whole thing. That's completely different than a VA. That's somebody who comes up with your strategy and actually writing content. But then VAs, most of our VAs can post social media. They can create calendars to say, okay, what days you want it to hit. So you don't even have to worry about it. That it's just going to hit on, say, Tuesday and Thursday. You have something going on LinkedIn, Instagram, and all your social media. But a lot of our VAs do social media posting. And even gathering, like you could have a client say, I want you to find an article on this, and I want you to post it, things like that.
Yeah, well, and it could be like this podcast episode, right? Hey, I was on this, I was featured, repost this. Something else that I have VAs do on my social media is if I ever attend an event, which I attend to a lot of events, get the list of people that attended, or if I'm going, better yet, if I'm going to attend, I'm speaking this fall at the CISI conference in London. And so we're messaging ahead everybody who's going to be there saying, hey, are you going to be there? Can we meet for a pint of beer? We're kind of going through that. And that's just something that takes time. And again, I would never get around to it, but Zach can go through and work down that. And now instead of just showing up and I don't know anybody, I'm showing up and there's 10 or 15 people that are ready to meet me and meet for a drink and be productive.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I've had other clients that do that. And that just makes so much better use of your time.
I know we're bouncing around a little bit. Something else that I've done on my calendar recently that Zach's helped me with, I took my entire, the next 3 months, so the next calendar quarter, and I went through and designated my, Dan Sullivan, strategic coach, calls them free days, focus days, buffer days. I run multiple companies, and so I have blocked in, this is my Jarvis Financial Day, this is my Perfect RIA Day, this is my Retirement Tax Services Day. So he's coding those days and then protecting those for that company, and then making sure that anybody that's involved with those companies, they're invited to that calendar so they know, and then checking with them to say, hey, what things do you want Matt to potentially work on that day? Whereas before I would be like, I'd call my team like, hey, I'm doing Jarvis Financial stuff. What do you have? They're not ready for that. It hasn't been filtered. They haven't gone through the background check or background setup on that. And so that's something else that VAs do great on Calendly. If I have somebody scheduled, great, here's the 3 questions we need from. We need an agenda. We need a follow-up. We need confirmation. We need to make sure that they've got the technology in place. All of those things.
I love the way that you've done that with the different days with your different companies, just to keep you kind of focused on one thing at a time. And yeah, another thing our VAs are really good at is meeting agenda, making sure that you've got everything you need for your meeting, taking meeting notes, sending out action items after, and then also holding people accountable. A lot of clients that I work with, they need somebody to go in and say, okay, we met. This is what you were supposed to, Matthew needs this by tomorrow. That way, that person's holding them accountable, and you're not having to do that. You don't have time to do that. No,
it's not my highest and best use. Here's another interesting one, Karen. I feel like you and I could always compare war stories on delegation. I feel like you're going to win every time. I had discovered for a while I was having a hard time ending meetings on time. It's not the case so much anymore, but I was having a hard time ending meetings on time. And so what I would do is for in-person meetings, I was in my office. My assistant in my office would come into the meeting 10 minutes before it was supposed to end, and she would knock on the door and crack it open and smile at me. And I would say, oh, Colleen, thank you so much for keeping me on track. And that was my way to make sure the meeting ended. For virtual meetings, we do the same thing. 5 or 10 minutes before the meeting is supposed to end, Zach or whichever company I'm working in can come into that meeting and say, hey, Matt asked me to join for the last few minutes to take action items to make sure that we're on pace to end. And so I'm looking to where am I not reliable? I'm not reliable for ordering flowers for Mother's Day. I'm not reliable for ending meetings on time or my calendar. Let me have someone else who's reliable do that.
Yeah, I love that you do that. I think that's so cool. Yeah, I've got clients that do that in different ways, kind of the way that you did it the first time, where they will get a ding 5 minutes before, and then they'll say, oh, sorry, I just got a message that I've got to get ready for my next meeting. But the way you did it is so good, because this person's coming in and they actually have an action. It's not like you're going, oh, sorry, I got to go. They're just there to wrap it up, which I love.
I'm always looking for ways. It's one of my mental hacks. How do I make this a win versus a loss? So I think by default, we think, oh, this is a loss. I don't have the discipline to do this. I just look at it as a win. Even booking adventures with friends. I'll tell Zach, I'll say, hey, here's 3 of my friends I haven't heard from in a long time. Reach out to them and let them know, hey, Matt knows that we're all notorious for not getting on a calendar, and he's asked me to get our calendars aligned. And so again, part of me, and sometimes my friends will push back. They're like, wait a second, you're having your virtual assistant call to schedule meetings. And I say, yeah, but did you call me? You didn't call me to set it up either. So I get it's a little strange, but I'm solving for success here. And this is really working.
Yeah, I love that. It's not strange, because if Zach didn't do that, it probably wouldn't happen.
It wouldn't happen. And that's kind of what's behind door number 2. Door number 2 is it doesn't happen. Door number 1 is maybe it seems strange that I have an assistant doing it, but it's getting done.
Absolutely. I love it.
Karen, any other items as we talk about that list that come to mind where you say, hey, everybody really needs to be delegating this thing, or where you've seen really people have a big improvement when it comes to delegation?
I'm trying to think of other, there's so many things that we do. Personal things, and then helping with managing CRMs, managing systems.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about CRMs. We didn't talk about processes. I know we've had people help us with, like, if you realize that you're naming conventions. In fact, Zach's actually literally working on that project right now. We did a big 2 days of content recording for the Perfect RIA. The guy that did the recording, he didn't label the files. I need you to go through and use this naming criteria and name all of the files, and then take the audio files, upload them all into Firefly so that we can get a transcription of them so I can then mark them up. So what for me would have been hours and totally mind-numbing work, Zach's got it taken care of. Probably by tomorrow, I'll have a list of all these transcriptions. I can go through, highlight the reels, and then the editing team will take that off. And so even those seemingly small steps make a big difference.
Yeah. And I don't think, if you've been doing something for so long, that there are a lot of things that aren't streamlined. And so I think when you have a fresh set of eyes come in who's an expert and they've worked in a lot of different CRMs, a lot of different task management tools, they can come in right away and say, okay, I think this might work better. So that's something that I've really seen VAs help with.
You know how I've had really good success with it, now that we mentioned that one, and then we'll transition to action items, is I'll often do a Loom video of me doing a task. So whether it's something I want to delegate one time or I just want to understand it better, I'll hit record on Loom or Zoom or whatever, and then I'll do a screen share just by myself, nobody else there, and I'll just do stream of consciousness. Well, now I click over here. Now I check this thing. Now, why do I click over here? I don't know, but I always click over here, and I just walk through that whole thing. And then they have a video to watch. And then, like you said, a third party can watch and say, oh, wait a second, we could do this in 5 steps instead of 50. And did you know that the software actually updated? There's one button now to do that. So it's an easy way of, I'm already going to do this task. Let me just hit record on it, and I'll hand off a stream of consciousness to somebody else.
I love it. I think you're so smart with the way you do things, Matthew. And I think a lot of that just is trust with, like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try it. Loom we use that at Belay. It's like so awesome. I am not a technical person. So when IT comes out with something new and I get that Loom, I'm like, oh, good. I can just watch this and freeze it and, figure it out. So I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. A 5-star tip on Loom. I'm sure the Belay tech people already have this figured out, but for everyone else, if you're going to send the same Loom video to multiple people, so let's say you're going to record one and send it to your clients or your team, turn off comments. Turn off comments, because what you don't want to have, I don't tell you how I learned this thing. We send out a video and someone's like, hey, Matt, I'm really excited to see you for the fishing trip on Thursday. And then everyone else is like, what fishing trip? I never heard about this. Because if you send the video to multiple people, the comments are seen by everybody. So take a second to turn off comments.
That's a good tip.
Yeah. Learned that in a painful way. All right, well, let's transition to action items. This podcast is all about taking actions, right? It's the things that you delegate that count, not the things that you think about delegate. So, Karen, I want to mention again one that you said at our last episode, which is make this list. Just keep a piece of paper by your desk, and any task you do, write that down. And I think you also highlighted any task that you think about and then you don't get around to doing, right? Like, hey, I was going to do this thing and I'm not going to get around to it. Jot those down and then say, all right, who's going to take care of this for me?
Yeah. And think outside the box. It's really anything that you don't think you should be spending your time doing.
Yep. Or anything that you're just not reliable. I'll mention one more. I know we got to wrap this episode up. I'm not reliable for working out when I'm on the road, which I told myself was not a big deal, but I'm on the road a lot. And so that's a lot of days where I don't work out. So inside of TripIt, which Zach set up TripIt for me, that was a lifesaver. It has the closest gym to wherever I'm staying. And it's on my calendar to go to the gym during these times so that I make sure I get that in. And it's all just built into the TripIt. So it's really exciting.
And that's huge. And that is so important if you're somebody that works out. I'm the same way. Like if I go somewhere, I want to know that I have a gym. So the fact that Zach is taking care of that, that it's there, kind of holds you accountable to say, okay, well, I know where it is. I got to go.
Yeah, totally. Another action item, of course, as we mentioned on our last episode, text the letters RIA to 55123 to get a free copy of Belay's book on virtual assistants and delegation. Also, don't hesitate to reach out to Belay, get a call with them and talk about things, because whatever we talked about, Karen, someone else is going to say, wait, I have these 5 other things on my list that I can't delegate. Great, ask Belay. Like the worst thing they're going to do is tell you no, which sounds unlikely, but ask them, right? These guys are experts at delegation. I only know what I've delegated. They've seen what everyone's delegated.
Yeah, there's so many things, like even project management, coming in and managing a project. There's so many things beyond what you think about that our VAs can do.
I love that. Well, Karen, hey, thank you so much for these insights. I learned several things. I'm just going to, like I said, I'm going to give this episode to Zach, my VA, and have him implement these for me, which will be great. Appreciate you all that you do. Any other parting words of wisdom for our listeners?
No, I would just say, I would say that you're a really good client to be talking about this because I think you have kind of let go and let your VA handle so many things. And you've done it right. And that comes with trust and communication and feedback. So appreciate you and all that you do.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, Karen, thank you so much. And for all our listeners, until next time, happy planning.